Hi, everybody. Happy Saturday. Super excited for tonight's class. Tonight's class is all about South American wines, and it's not going to be a history class or a terroir class or even too much of an analytical class. I just want to share 4 new wines that I found that I really was excited about, and I want to share them with you. So it's being blast. We're going to try 2 whites and 2 red wines. If you're tuning in live, I'd love to hear from you in the chat room. If you can't figure out how to access the chat room, make sure that you are logged in to whatever email account is connected to YouTube, so that way you can participate in the chat room. If on the upper right-hand corner it says sign in, that means you are not signed in, you can't do the chat room. But if you are tuned in with the chat room, I'd love to hear from you. Tawana, you must be a new member to the group. Just kidding. Tawana is my most loyal customer who attends all of the virtual classes, which is so exciting. Thank you so much for all of your support and participation in these. I love nerding out with you. Very, very excited about these wines here. Just poured them all, so I'm smelling them. Tawana, did you get a chance to decant or like pour your red wines in advance? I have found that these red wines need a little bit of time to breathe. So if you haven't already, just pour, if you're using a Coravin, just go ahead and pour whatever you want to sample in a glass that you can get back to later when we get to the red wines. But that way they've got some time to kind of breathe and open up. If you've been decanting them for an hour already, then marvelous. You are already one step ahead of the game. So awesome. Pour them in advance with the Coravin. Fabulous, fabulous. For those of you who might be watching and are always wondering what I'm talking about when I talk about Coravin, it's this contraption right here. No, I don't sell them. They don't sponsor me. I make no money from the sales of Coravin, only indirectly, because if more people had Coravins, then they'd attend more classes, because it wouldn't be scary as one person or 2 people opening up 4 bottles of wine on a Saturday night. So it's this contraption here. It has a needle, and it allows you to pierce the cork with the needle, access the wine, replacing that space with argon gas, which is in a little canister in this part of the contraption here. It's the same atmospheric pressure units as oxygen, so it's not going to change the flavor of the wine, but it does keep the pressure the same so the bottles don't explode, which is a really great thing. Highly recommend this. Once you use that and open up a bottle of wine, access it. The wine is still good for months. Some say years. I have found that like 6 months is about my limit on how long the wine stays really good for, if you're accessing the wine multiple times. And as soon as you get down to, honestly, like about halfway down into the bottle, then I think the shelf life goes down quite a bit. But it's amazing for keeping the wine the exact same for like 4 to 6 months is absolutely perfect. So highly, highly recommend everyone get a Coravin. That's just a little side plug there, and has nothing to do with this class, but I love preaching the gospel of Coravin whenever I can. Is anyone else, I see some other people else are tuned in live. I'd love to hear from you if you are. But I'm going to just kind of jump in and go into these wines. So if you've got the wines from the class packet, then you've got the list of all of the information here, so we can kind of take notes. I've started doing this now for my future classes, just to give one concise space to take notes. However you like to take notes. The most important part is just that you're writing down something that you're smelling and tasting in the wine. It helps cement that in your memory. You don't have to store and catalog these. You can if you want to. I do. All of my tasting notes get piled up in these notebooks, and I have trunkfuls of like all of my tasting notes for years and years and years, all piled up. So, well, John, fabulous to see you, and you from Virginia Beach. Super excited that you're here tonight. Do you have these wines with us today? Are you going to be tasting the same wines, or are you going to be tasting something else? And if it's something else, just tell us what you're drinking. We'd love to hear what else other people are drinking out there. Also in the packages here, if you got the wines, then you should have the wine aroma charts. Now, for those of you who have been attending my classes for a long time, you might have memorized this chart by now and then can read it upside down like I'm showing you. That's totally cool. Love that. You only need to use this as much as it benefits you. So don't be thinking that you need to use this. It's just a tool for as much as you want to use it. So hello, Aiden, Alan. Well, I'm glad you got it all connected. I had trouble too. This is like the second time I've done these events from my home, and now it seems like it doesn't seem to connect as well as it did when I'm at Some Mom and Some Pop's house. So hi, Ryan, great to see you. And Elaine, great to see you as well. Very excited to have you. I think this is your first time with the class pack. So very excited to have some new people here. So if you are newer, make sure you've got these, have a pen, and on the back of the tasting sheets here, the note pages here, we have kind of steps of tasting wine that I think is really helpful when you're doing tastings, to follow the same steps every single time. Kind of helps us get in rhythms. So it's just like when you get really into working out, you do this like similar warm-ups, and then similar enough exercises so you start seeing actual progress in skills that are developed. And that's exactly what wine tasting is. It's a skill that we're all developing it, and it's a lot of fun, kind of the best fun ever. So yes, so welcome everybody who's newer to the tribe. Welcome everybody who is longtime tribe members. Last week we did a virtual happy hour of everyone in the tribe that I opened up, and it was really great to see everyone's faces and interact. And so hopefully we'll be doing that again soon. So if you want to see the faces of the people that you keep interacting with in the chat rooms. Chat room is important for me to answer your questions. So any question, whether it's related to something we're talking about right now, or anything that's about wine, just go ahead and jot that in. This is the time to ask the expert or ask the som, anything that might be on your mind. So please ask away. If I miss any of your questions, Tawana, I'm gonna delegate you to be my message keeper upper wither. And if I've missed any like big questions that I need to answer, just alert me to that. Sometimes it's hard to keep up with the chat room. So thank you all for attending tonight. Very, very excited. All right, fabulous. The next class is blind tasting. If you're interested, next week's class is going to be a lot of fun. After that, we've got another Meet the Winemaker event. So I know I'm behind schedule. I'm posting all of these onto my website. I will try and get that up tonight, actually, the next events through May, actually. So those will be up so we can plan a little bit further in advance next time. So. All right, so we're only going to be talking about one wine at a time. I know often that I like to do two wines side by side, but the two whites are drastically different and the two reds are drastically different, different producers, different countries, different grape varieties. So I don't think that in that sense, it is super informative to try wines side by side. I always pour mine out in advance, so I don't have to worry about finding the bottles and pouring on camera and missing the bottles and spilling anything. But we're going to start off with a Sauvignon Blanc here. So whatever you have in your glass, if you don't have these wines, we're going to talk about the steps of tasting wine, and we'll go through it all. And so you can still practice that, even though we might be drinking something different. So go ahead and pour yourself a glass. You can pour yourself a large glass or a medium-sized glass like this, but it's important to pour more than just an ounce or two, because the wine will change as it opens up, and you'll want to keep revisiting it to see how it changes. And if you're constantly refilling your glass, then you're kind of going back to step one each time with the wine. So to really see the best progression, go ahead and pour yourself that 4-ounce glass. Even if you're not drinking it all, that will help the wine kind of open up the most. So as you're getting your noses in there and kind of getting your first sips and your introduction, the first impressions of the wine, I'm going to talk about this producer. This producer is called Omne, which translates to the universe in Spanish. So they have this really beautiful labeling right here, if you can see it and get it focused on here. So it's Atlas, right, holding the globe on his shoulders. Really just gorgeous labeling. They focus on single vineyard wines. And I'd like to just take a moment and talk about what that means. Single vineyard, why does it matter if it's one vineyard or more than one vineyard? And it's all different, right? Sometimes people are looking for the balance and complexity that comes with blending many vineyards together, many grapes together, many vintages even together sometimes, especially in sparkling wine. Other times, people like to focus on the singularity of flavor that they find is expressed when they make wine from one single vineyard. Now, when we think of vineyard, you might think of something that's like about an acre large, not necessarily like huge. And so you might think of small production wine, very small production wine when it comes to being a single vineyard wine. And that is definitely often the case. It is not necessarily the case in Omne's case. So they have about 100 acres total that they are farming or utilizing within this part of Chile. This is the Limari Valley in Chile, in Coquimbo, in northern Chile, one of the northernmost regions in Chile. Their vineyard itself might be quite large, and in fact, let's see here. I think I had the actual size of it, but I can't find those numbers right now. So those vineyards, when we talk about single vineyard wines, might be extremely small, and so you're going to find a very uniform terroir within that one single vineyard. And terroir is just that French word that encompasses not just soil type. Most people think terroir is just soil type, but it's not. It encompasses everything that gives that vineyard a sense of place. So it is soil, yes, but it's also exposition, meaning are they facing north and getting sun if they're in the southern hemisphere, or are they facing south and getting a lot more shade? We're in the southern hemisphere, so south would get more daytime shade. Are they facing east, so they're getting morning sun, or west, so they're getting that late night sun or late afternoon sun? Or is there tons of winds around that will change the dynamic? Do they have a lot of fog, maybe early frost? How much does it rain? What are the other agricultural elements around it? Like, are there forests that might protect from wind, harsh winds? Or maybe there's fields of rosemary, and so that's going to impart different esters and oils in the airs. There's so much that goes into terroir that's not just soil, but mostly it's soil, exposition, meaning which way the vineyards are facing and the slant and the slope of the actual vineyard, and climate. And that includes not just temperature, but average amount of sunlight per day and rainfall as well. So exposition, climate, and soil all come together to make terroir. And the idea is that that unique terroir is expressed with specificity, with intensity, with focus, with a linear focus, a more pointed, narrow focus, and intention to express that terroir of that vineyard in a wine, versus it might get lost. And so if you start blending vineyards and vineyards, then you might find that overall the balance of the wine might actually increase, because you're going to get more. This flavor is going to balance off the flavors that are coming out of the wines from this vineyard, that are going to balance the wines coming off the flavors of this vineyard. So you might get a more balanced wine, but you lose a little bit of that unique character that the wine has when it comes from a single vineyard. So when it comes down to making the choice, do I make wines from a single vineyard, or do I blend? That's really up to the winemaker and what they're trying to focus, what they're trying to do. So some wineries actually choose to make all of their wines single vineyard wines, and Omne is one of those. So Omne is kind of the label by this larger producer. So the larger producer is Viña Tabali, or Viña Tabali, and founded, I guess, about 3 decades ago. So in the 90s, we're thinking. And but this whole area has really only had more focus and agricultural focus, and a focus on wine specifically as a part of that agricultural focus in the last 20 years. So we're talking very young. We're talking in the 2000s. Like, these vineyards might just now start to be able to drive, not even vote, or certainly not drink in the United States. That's how young these vineyards are, how young the history is in this region. So it's really exciting to see a lot of the experimentation of kind of this untapped land, of this wide expanse. So right now, Viña Tabali has, again, about 180 acres total planted to vine in this area in Coquimbo. However, the entire area is only about 500 acres planted to vine. So if the entire area in this area of Chile, about 500 acres planted to vine, this one producer, Viña Tabali, is responsible for almost 200 acres of those 500. So huge influencer in the region, and they're kind of setting the stage. They've been there the longest, and they are definitely like leading the charge in production for this. So you might find wines that are labeled Viña Tabali. I don't know if they're available here in Virginia, but this is Amne, and this is their Sauvignon Blanc that we have in our glass. So it's just kind of a little bit of the back history. And oh, hi, Amanda and Matt. Great to see you. Matt, happy belated birthday. Hope y'all had a good time celebrating. And don't worry, these wines are actually, all 4 of these wines are going to be featured on my list for at least the next couple of months. I was so excited about them. And it's been months now that I've been looking for some staples of some South American features that I could really get behind, that weren't, featured by everyone around here. So, and I just hadn't found them yet. And when I found them, I was like, well, I've got to do a class just on these wines. So if you didn't get the 4-pack now, it will still be available. So, all right, let's get our noses in this Sauvignon Blanc. It is about to be truly Sauvignon Blanc season. I know we had some cooler weather this week that made it harder to get into these crisp, light, fresh white wines. But we'll get there soon, I promise. If you have these, just go ahead and turn the card over here. We're going to kind of just walk through this, and I'll explain for the newer folks the steps of tasting. We won't get super into it because it's not an analytical class. That will be next week for the blind tasting. And by the way, the blind tasting is going to be a blast. The blind tasting is like a back to basics blind tasting. So if you are nervous about blind tasting, have never blind tasted before, and you think that's a scary thing and intimidating, don't worry, that's what this class is for you. So you can walk into kind of any tasting after this and really kind of own the experience in a different way. If you've been blind tasting with me for a long time, it's still gonna be fun. So anyone and everyone is welcome. All right, so sight. So first of all, color. We don't actually want to hold the wine up to the light to see color, because that's just going to pick up the color from all around the room, which is a lot of wine bottles in my room right now. So you actually want to hold the wine on its side, and you want to look kind of like straight down through the wine. And you're looking for color that way. So notice how much less pigment you see in the wine when you hold it this way versus holding it up to the light. It's much darker when I do that. Now, it depends on, I guess, the lighting, what else is in around the room. But I see much paler pigment. For a white wine, this is definitely on that straw, very, very pale pigmentation wine with really like beautiful green and yellow flecks and silver flecks to it, which generally, that means that indicates that the wine is very young and not aged in oak. So just little clues here. Clarity, is it cloudy or hazy? You can really see that if you swirl the wine through the light, and you can even see on camera how much the light is reflecting through this wine. I don't see any haziness or cloudiness. Put those 2 words together, which I almost did, as howdiness, and I like that. This wine is not very howdy. It's not very hazy or cloudy. Brilliantly clear, just absolutely brilliantly clear. It's almost making rainbows through the wine as I swirl it. So that's really cool. The concentration, can you read through? This really gets to the red wine, because we can obviously read through this, right? So we'll get back to that with the reds. And the legs are tearing. That's after you swirl the wine, let the wine settle down the inside of the glass. You're looking at the part of the glass that's further away from you. You're looking for those legs or teardrops of the extra wine as it forms these drips, drops, legs, and falls down the inside of the glass. What this is telling us is alcohol percentage. So we're not looking for how long they are, because the length of the legs is really just how aggressively you swirled and how full your cup is. So the length is not what we're looking for. We're looking for the thickness and the definition and how slow they are to form and fall. So if they are like not defined, can hardly see them, they're rushing down the glass, and they're not very thick, they're very thin, that would indicate lower alcohol content. Alcohol is going to increase those legs, the strength of the legs. It looks like those legs have been doing squats in the gym. And if you can see, mine definitely, like that first round was really fast, but the second round is pretty defined, pretty slow to form and fall, and thicker. So this would indicate for me generally a higher alcohol content white wine, or at least on the medium side. Let's see here. 12.5% it says. So that would definitely be like on the just under medium, on the lower side of things. So not necessarily high, which is interesting. Sometimes wines can fool us. So now that we've gotten the wine really swirled up, and it's totally fine if you've jumped ahead and have already started tasting this wine, just make sure, again, you leave enough in your glass or leave enough in the bottle to refill to keep going back to it. But the last reason we swirl it, so first for that clarity, second to make sure we understand the legs, and the third is as the wine coats the inside of the glass, alcohol starts to evaporate, just minutely so, and allows for those esters or those aromatics to be released into the air, become vaporized. So we want that to happen. That's why we swirl the wine and then smell it. So if you've ever wondered what it is when people are saying, oh, I'm just going to let it breathe and swirl the wine a little bit, that's what we're doing. We're just introducing oxygen to the wine to release those aromatics that comes with slight alcohol evaporation. So give the wine some good swirls, get your nose all the way in the glass. And then I like to first just think about how intense the nose is. So is that aromatic just rushing out of the glass, kind of like hit you in your face, or is it shy and reserved and you're really having to kind of hunt for it? Hopefully your wine is vibrant on the nose as mine is. Mine is definitely rushing out of the glass, very intensely aromatic and vibrantly so. Like my eyes are watering almost a little bit when I'm smelling this, but like in a good way. It's like a spicy citrus way. So after I think about intensity, and for me, this would be like a level like 4 out of 5 if I'm going to rate them 1 to 5, which is my scale, but you can also just rate them however you like, whatever form makes sense to you. So that's intensity. Next, I would think about fruit, and this is where this is helpful. And even if you are an experienced taster and taste all the time, I do recommend having something like this. Doesn't have to be my vinoculture wine chart. Could be anything you can print out online. Because what happens is we tend to write the same reviews for a lot of the same wines, right? So we'll taste wine. The more we taste, kind of the more we fall back on the same descriptors all the time. So it's good, even if you are an experienced taster, to every now and then go back to a wine aroma chart or aroma wheel or something to get a few new vocabulary words that I'm like, oh, I forgot about mango. Like I never write tasting notes of mango because I just kind of forget about that. But sometimes being reminded of all of the options helps us to delve deeper into the aromatics of a wine. So if you're smelling anything specific in this wine, love to hear about it in the chat room. Whether it's fruit and you can, or non-fruit, and even the fruit condition, which to me is more important than the naming the fruit itself. So the fruit condition would be like ripe or underripe, cooked, maybe jammy, raisinated. And that to me is more important than naming a specific fruit. So you can just say, I smell raisinated fruit, or I smell underripe fruit. And that's a really key part here. So all right, so Tawana says, holy jalapeno, right? Yes, absolutely. Love the nose on this, getting loads of fresh jalapeno with the seeds and veins removed. Great, so it's not as much of the bitter side. It's like the fresh oils that come from the actual pepper part. I love that call. Citrus, minerality, hint of canned pineapple. And Alan says honey too on this. So, like, does it actually smell sweet, Alan, or does it smell like the honeycomb, like the bitter, like the honeycomb you get it in a jar or one of those cans from Whole Foods? It's awesome. You get the whole honeycomb that smells a little bit less sweet and more honeyed. I like that call. Great tasting notes, Tawana. It's gonna be hard to follow that up. I agree with everything. So on the flavor profile side of these, I think all of the fruits, the condition definitely on this wine leads more to that underripe side. And definitely I'm getting lots of citrus and tropical notes on this one. Maybe a little bit of like some peach and apricot, but the citrus notes and the pepper notes are definitely abundant and on that underripe side. So honeycomb, Alan says, I would totally agree with you. I think that that it doesn't smell like it's a sweet wine at all, but it has some of those characteristics. So really interesting. I get some herbs in this wine as well too. So almost like green tea. If I haven't actually steeped it yet, it's just the loose leaf green tea, and maybe even like fennel, basil, some of those like licoricey side of the herbs, and maybe even some like eucalyptus, some of those like mentholated kind of pops. Maybe I'm just saying that because it's so aromatic, so intense on the nose, but quite interesting aromatically, right? It's not your typical New Zealand style of Sauvignon Blanc where it's just grass and grapefruit and cat's pee and maybe some like gooseberry too. That's very New Zealand in style. And it's not so much just lemon that the French would focus on, lemon and kind of like very delicate aromatics and minerality. This to me is distinctly Chileano or Chilean on its aromatic composition. So, all right, let's taste. I always like to do kind of two tastes. The first taste, I'm just kind of swallowing a sip down right away, kind of get that first impressions. And then the next sip, of course, we want to swish it around. We want to swirl it in our mouth. We want to slurp in some air while the wine is in our mouth. That allows for, again, that wine to breathe oxygen to interact with the wine while it's in our mouth. Totally creates a new experience of the wine. So cheers to you if you haven't had a sip yet, and let's enjoy. Well, first impression, I think because I smelled so much of the citrus and like pepper, I thought the wine was going to be like almost like just lemon water, like just crazy straight acid, and it was pleasantly not as acidic as I kind of expected it to be at the very beginning. Let's see if my swishing and swirling will allow anything else to come out in the wine. Ooh. There's the acid. Oh yeah, yeah. Sorry, my mouth is still watering. That is so vibrant, so fresh, mouth-watering, like juicy, juicy, juicy fruits on that. Really, to me, Tawana, I'm getting all of the pineapple that you wrote in your aromatic notes. I'm getting that on the palate, and not like sweet Dole's pineapple, but like a bit in too far into the core, kind of that a little bit more of the bitter pineapple side. Lots of that pink grapefruit note, that sweeter grapefruit style. And while there was so much jalapeno on the nose, I expected the wine to be a little bit more spicy than it was on the palate. And it's a little bit tamer. So I think this wine is so fun in that it's like party all up in your nose, but it's like, all right, don't worry, I'm not gonna be too intense. It's got that freshness, that vibrant acidity, but it is creamier and totally quaffable wine for sure. So Tawana says getting much more of the citrus on the palate, the pineapple, but more fresh, not canned, and lime zest. Yeah, all right, cool, I like it. Definitely zesty fruit. It's not like citrus oils that can kind of be weighty and viscous. It's vibrant and fresh. I like the zest call for sure. All right, so on the palate, acid, just to explain a couple of the terms, acid is the mouth watering effect that we kind of feel in the back of our mouth. So after you swish it around, slurp it around, after you swallow the wine, if you lean back, touch the tip of your tongue to the roof of your mouth and breathe in, it's going to suck the air to the sides of your cheeks here and kind of activate your salivary glands. The more you feel that pucker effect, and the more you feel that mouth watering effect, the drool effect, the higher the acid is in the wine. Definitely got all that acid to come out when I did that in this wine. We'll see how the next white wine does in comparison. Tannins, skip over that. We're going to get back to that with the red wines. Now, sweetness can be tricky. Sometimes wines are really sweet smelling. They might smell really tropical or really fruity, really floral even, maybe that honeycomb note. And you might think that there is some residual sugar in the wine. The wine is actually sweet. let's see if there actually is. And to do that, we're going to stick just the tip of our tongue into the wine, like so. That's all. And then focus your senses just on the tip of your tongue and see if you taste sweetness on the tip of your tongue. I do not. It is definitely not like a bone dry wine. It doesn't feel like I just dipped my tongue in chalk. It's not bone dry, that's what we'd call it. But it's definitely, I don't get any sweetness on the tip of that. So that's sweetness. We'll see if the next white wine has any more sweetness, or maybe all of these 4 wines will be drier style. So alcohol. So we kind of got a clue about alcohol when we were swirling the wine, looking at the legs. But alcohol will get more of a sensation of the alcohol when we drink it if we focus on where we feel that alcohol evaporation sensation or that burn in our throat after we swallow it. So if you've taken a shot of tequila to pregame for tonight, then you felt that tequila down to your chest. And so the lower you feel that alcohol evaporation, that burn sensation, the higher the alcohol content is on the wine. So take another sip and don't think about anything going on in your mouth, any of the acid or sweetness or anything. Just think about where you feel that alcohol burn. Now the best wines, right, have alcohol that even if you feel it like ever so slightly, and it's not a very intense sensation. That would be more integrated alcohol. You don't want it to hurt going down. You want people to enjoy drinking your wine. So I definitely feel this kind of like right there in the middle. So again, this wine to me appears to and feels like it's slightly higher alcohol content than their label says. And sometimes there is some wiggle room in how wines are labeled according to alcohol. But to me, I'm getting a little bit higher alcohol than what 12.5. 12.5, I'd feel it closer up to here. I'm definitely getting a little bit further down, more like that 13.5 range. But who's to know? If anyone got a different experience on this wine, go ahead and let me know in the chat room for sure. Body is just how heavy the wine sits on your palate, on your tongue. So is this a really light-bodied wine or a really full-bodied wine and dense? It's not sweetness. It's not related to alcohol. It's not related to even anything else. It's kind of its own animal. Often, higher alcohol content wines are fuller-bodied, but not always. So don't put them together if they're not actually always together. In this case, they're not. I would say this wine is definitely a lighter bodied wine, right? It doesn't sit heavy on the tongue at all. It's not the lightest bodied wine I've ever had, but it's definitely on that very light scale. So that's body. And then finish is how long the flavor lasts in your mouth after you drink the wine. So you might think, well, obviously a light bodied wine like this, the flavor won't last for very long. But oftentimes I'm very surprised at the lighter bodied wines that I taste that have a finish that just goes on and on and on and on. And sometimes the really full bodied wines that you think that flavor is going to last a long time just kind of plummets away. Not always, so they don't go hand in hand all the time, but sometimes they do. So tell me, for your own palate, how long did this finish last in your mouth of this Sauvignon Blanc? Tawana says, getting much more of the citrus on the palate. Okay, we talked about this. More fresh pineapple, not canned, great, and lime zest. And Ada says, we thought the alcohol taste was up high, but definitely agree, legs indicated higher alcohol content. Good, and I got it just to preface how it goes for me doing these things. Sometimes there's so much focus on saying the right things in the chat room and making sure I get all my notes on the wines correct and all. It's harder for me to really focus on my own tasting of the wine. So often I look back and I'm like, oh, this wine tastes totally different now than when I tasted it on camera. It just changes things, the dynamic of how you experience wine. So it's curious. I'll taste it again later tonight. And I'll let you know if maybe my sensation was a little bit off tonight. So, all right. So that's body and finish. I think that the wine, to me, get a lot of a little bit more of the green pepper, basil, kind of herbaceous finish, and lime, like all the green things in the wine. And it kind of slowly tapers off. It's definitely not the longest finish of a wine I've ever had, but certainly not the shortest either. It kind of surprised me how long the wine continued to linger in my mouth and not just one singular flavor profile. So that's going into our next couple of things. Down at the very bottom, overall conclusion. And basically, what we've done, sight, smell, and the palate so far, is we've broken the wine down into very specific components. And sometimes when we do that, we lose sight of the wine as a whole. And so it's important before you finish up a wine tasting to kind of put the wine back together again, taste it again, and think about it as a whole. Don't think about all the separate components and acid and tannin and sweetness and alcohol. Put it together and think about the wine as a whole. Was there balance in the wine? Was all of the flavor that was there well integrated? Did it harmonize well together? So just like in a cappella group, we've all heard really amazing a cappella groups where it's hard to believe that there's no instruments and they all harmonize so well. And I'm sure we've all heard some kind of awkward a cappella groups where it's like, whoa, that one note over there. Yes, they're on key, but it's not blending with everything else. And so to me, a balance is that like really great harmony of all the different voices or flavors of the wine. So that's a balance. And complexity is just how many voices or flavors there are. So is it a 3% a cappella group, or is it a 25% a cappella group, or somewhere in between? So those are balance and complexity. And to me, that really goes into my final conclusion, or my score of the wine, my impression of the overall wine as a whole. Would I drink this again? Would I recommend this again? Do I think that this wine offers quality and value? Those are the things that I think about most when it comes to my review of the wine. Everything else is important and it helps lead me to that conclusion. But before I get to the conclusion, it's so important to kind of really get into thoughts of balance and complexity. And this is why I picked these wines, because to me, the wine, while it wasn't perfectly balanced, because there was kind of just some like off the wall, vibrant flavors that are kind of explosive and some over the top, to me, that offered really complexity. And if it was slightly off balance, it was in a really fun and enjoyable way. It wasn't off kilter. It didn't seem wonky. To me, it was really, really pleasantly complex and slightly off balance, and made it a really fun wine for me. So my final score on this wine obviously could be very different than yours, especially if you really don't like Sauvignon Blanc or such. But my final score on this wine, I always rate wines in stars and hearts, and here's why. So let me give you an example here on my my tasting books here. So stars and hearts in any of my tastings to the side. A heart is whether or not I personally like it, whether I enjoy this. So the bigger the heart and the more hearts there are, the more I really enjoy that wine. And stars indicate like the actual value. So I might love the wine, but like that wine is $10 or $15, way too expensive than what I would pay for it. So I love it, but the value is not there. So to me, a wine needs to have both hearts and stars if I'm going to drink it again. And this wine for me got 2 hearts and 2 stars, or no, three stars, because I liked it, but the value was definitely there. So that's how I rate my wines. Everyone has their own different scores. Some people just rate it on a score of 1 to 100, but I don't think that that gives context for me. So again, because I might love it and I think it's a 100-point wine, but I'm not going to spend $500 on that bottle. So to me, the value wasn't there as much. So find your own point system, but if you want to put your final conclusion on there, it's curious to go back to it later on throughout the night and see if your final conclusion has changed at all. So and actually I need to go back to your thoughts on the alcohol. After the second sip, so that was the first time I actually drank the wine, and you're totally right, Ada and Alan, I did not actually feel that as down as I thought I did when I first tasted the wine. So second sip, thinking about it a little bit more, I didn't feel that at all. So Pardon me for going back there. I do not feel it burn down deeper. I feel it definitely, yeah, yeah. It feels like a 12.5. So I take back my previous note. So Tawana says, I really enjoyed this wine. I found that I'm attracted to the jalapeno notes. Maybe my Texas roots coming through. You do like, and you like Sauvignon Blancs too, whether that's that sparkling Sauvignon Blanc from South Africa, or that new one that you just got from New Zealand. I enjoy jalapeno notes in wines too. I don't really eat spicy food at all because I find that it wrecks my palate for the next, sometimes the next 24 to 48 hours, depending on how spicy the food was. And obviously that's my job. So I try to avoid spicy food unless it's wasabi, because wasabi get that real intense pop of heat, but the flavor doesn't linger in your mouth the same way that the oils of peppers do. So I'm able to handle a lot of wasabi in my sushi, but I avoid pepper spices. So I like when wines kind of have that because I love the flavor of it. I just try and avoid the actual spice. So speaking of food, Ada says, what would I pair this with? All right, this is the season when I start doing all of my pairings for chips, salsa, guacamole, queso trio, and tacos. Like those are the things that I will eat every day for the rest of my life, especially in like the spring and summertime. And so my wines, you might see like my wine review tags, all of these tags right here that have the tasting, the pairing notes. You might see in the spring and summer, like every single one of them is paired with tacos, chips, guacamole, queso, salsa. And that's exactly what I want this wine with. I want that acidity and that vibrancy to kind of bring out things. I went to Mi Hogar, the Mexican restaurant up here in Norfolk. I don't know if you've been there, Ada and Alan, but they have these carnitas tacos that has like this pineapple relish on it that was really amazing and so tasty. And that with this wine, I think would absolutely be perfect. Now, if you're not the taco fanatic like I am, then I'm thinking like fish on the grill would be great with this. Ceviche, calamari, something fresh, vibrant, more seafood focused, I would say, or chicken focused. And I don't think I'd want anything too spicy with this because the acid is going to accentuate spice. Although if you like spicy, then you might actually enjoy that. So great questions. Ryan says, all right, you're talking notes there. If you have any other pairing ideas on this wine, please do tell me what you would pair this with. I'm very curious. So y'all are eating chips and pico de gallo from Luna Maya. That has gone well. That sounds phenomenal. They do have really good chips too, especially the saltiness goes well with the citrus flavors of this wine. So that's Omne. That's their Sauvignon Blanc. We're going to get back to Omne with their Carmenere at the end of the night. But let's go ahead and get into the next white wine now. Next white wine is a Viognier, is how the grape is pronounced. Viognier, we should all know this if we're here in Virginia because like it is like the Virginia white grape. Petit Manseng and Viognier are definitely all over the place. So this is by Finca La Scarcha, and it's their Entre Líneas, or Between the Lines Viognier here. That's the label that they have. So, all right, pour yourself a big old glass. We're gonna jump in. Oh man, I didn't just pour this. This wine has been in my glass since the beginning of this class. And so it is really opening up now in a super, super, super lovely way. All right, so we have gone from a pretty large producer, about 180 acres, to a much smaller producer here. And for Argentina, this is a tiny producer. I mean, I'm talking like boutique of the boutique of the boutique. It's 64 acres. Now, for a lot of the wines that I feature from boutique European producers, this is massive. But you think about the intense size, the land mass that you have in Argentina, how large it is often that a single vineyard might be 50 acres in this area of Mendoza, Argentina. So we have very large land mass area. There's more cows than humans. So just from horizon to horizon, open land with very few people here. So it is often that these producers are just massive and just like thousands of acres in production. This is a little tiny producer, tiny according to Argentina again, and they only produce about 1,000 cases total of their wine. So I picked up about 3 cases or 4 cases of their Malbec and 4 cases of their Viognier because I was really excited. So it's a husband and wife team. The wife is the architect who designed the winery actually and runs, I believe she kind of runs the winery part of things. And the winemaker, Santiago Reta, really focuses on Rhone varieties. So Rhone varieties would be Viognier, and Syrah is the red Rhone variety that he focuses on. Of course, he makes a Malbec, and that's what we're going to taste because I couldn't do a South American fines class without featuring a Malbec. But Syrah and Viognier are actually kind of his staples, and then he also just produces a Malbec as well. So entre líneas, which translates to between the lines. So just like the literary term, to read between the lines kind of implies that like there's subtlety, there's nuance, everything's not obvious and bold letters and exclamation marks. There's subtlety that you have to dig for the meaning a little bit more, and that's what he focuses on for his wines. So rather than these like super extracted, bold, intense wines that are obvious, delicious, but obvious, then he likes to focus a little bit more, kind of a little bit more old world style, right? A little bit more reserved on the oak flavors and the extraction, and a focus on balance and nuance over zippy zazzy. I love both of them. That's why I love doing both of these wineries side by side, because Omni is definitely that more modern focus, big bold fruit, extraction, vibrant. You get that Latino passion from the Omni, and you definitely get a little bit more of a serious, concentrated wine, a little bit more reservation in the wines coming from Finca La Escarcha. So this is Viognier. These vines are very young, so they're only about 15 years old, and both the Viognier and the Malbec coming from here. We're much higher elevation too. The vineyards for the Sauvignon Blanc was only about 500 feet elevation. So on Chile, on the side that faces the Pacific Ocean, you are on the western side of the Andes Mountains that are going up and down and that are the border between Chile and Argentina. Right across the border of Coquimbo is the area of Mendoza, Argentina. But instead of just right across the mountains, Mendoza is about this high in elevation, and the Limari Valley of Chile is about this low. So 500 feet elevation. Mendoza itself goes up to about 3,500 feet elevation. These particular vineyards are at about 3,200 feet elevation. So very high elevation vineyards in a little bit more of this like semi-arid continental climate. So those dramatic highs of temperature changes between very, very cold nights and very, very warm days versus the very temperate, almost Mediterranean climate of Chile. A little bit more moderation, a little bit just like cooler all around, not these dramatic shifts of temperature that you have in Mendoza with that higher elevation. Really fascinating what elevation does with the vines. Might talk about that with the Malbec. There's tons of limestone in these soils here, so it kind of matches a lot of the vineyard areas of northern Rhone, where Viognier is so important. So limestone, granite, and these loamy, kind of gravelly, rocky terrain. So kind of frustratingly difficult these vineyards are for these vines to grow and survive, but they make really beautiful wines. So let's get our noses in here. Oh, we need to go through sight. Sorry, jumping ahead of myself. I'm just so excited to taste this one. Notice that the color of this one is much darker. It has a little bit more of those yellow tingedness to the wine. So this wine is 2019. It's only 1 year older. So that means that darker coloring is from oak that the wine was aged in. And this wine was indeed aged for almost a year in French oak. So that's what the darker coloring is from. The clarity, we can definitely It's definitely no cloudiness or haziness still, no sediment at all. Just not as rainbow-esque as that Sauvignon Blanc was. Is there a big difference in your glass for the teardrops or the legs that this wine is featuring? I'm getting, I think it looks like thicker legs, but a little bit just less defined here. Let's see what the alcohol is here. 12.7, so slightly higher on the label at least. Let's get our noses in here. Please tell me what you're smelling this wine. Viognier is a very aromatic grape variety. And when made as a varietal wine, meaning not blended with anything else, they can be just truly stunning wines to smell. And there's a lot going on here to unpack. So please tell me what is that you are smelling in your wine here. Tawana says, I've been listening to some podcasts lately about white wines, and I have gotten the impression that Viognier is not well thought of in the industry. Why is that? Yes, it is true that Viognier kind of has a bad rep for the wine industry. And the reason is that Viognier is naturally a lower acid level grape, lower acidic. Just that's the grape genetics. Just like Sauvignon Blanc has naturally high levels of acidity, Viognier has pretty naturally lower levels of acidity. And the more you go into wine tasting, it's almost ubiquitous that I don't know if that's the right English word for this. It's almost synonymous that the more you go up in your wine tasting, the more you are craving the higher acid level wines. And it's just because you need something refreshing. You need something that's not going to be cloying and heavy on your palate. You need something you can keep going back and like it makes you want to taste more. Viognier can be a little bit cloying, can be a little bit like heavy and viscous. And so when this Viognier was brought to me, I almost didn't even want to taste it. I was like, Viognier, not my favorite grape. You know me. Why'd you bring me a Viognier? And oh my word, I was so pleasantly surprised by this wine. I think it has lovely acid, and I think it is not cloying at all. It's not clingy. Doesn't text you all day, every day. It gives you your space, if I can use a weird person analogy. But that is why Viognier, when it's not done well, it's done really not well. When it's done well, they can be truly amazing wines. But they can be two extremes, and it's pretty hard to find the really high quality Viogniers. There's just not a lot produced. So great question, a little insider information there. So let's see, Tawana says, getting hints of honeysuckle. Yeah, all the floral notes for sure. All these like spring flowers that we're starting to smell in the air now. Ripe tropical fruits all day, every day. Hella tropical. And underripe banana on the nose. Great call. Love that green banana call. Elaine says, honey stands out as an aroma to me. Absolutely. So here's where, if Alan was getting a little bit of honeycomb on the Sauvignon Blanc, I'm getting actual straight up honey, like the good raw honey from a farmer's market kind of honey on this wine, as well as honeysuckle flowers and honeycomb. So it's kind of everything that has honey involved in it. Absolutely. If I jump into Spanish words, miel is the name of honey in Spanish, and that's what I'm smelling. Maybe it's just because we're doing a Spanish class, but whenever I think of miel, I think of how the honey tastes in South America. I lived in Peru for a while, and it tastes and smells totally different than honey we have here, just because the bees are using different plants to pollinate and make honey from. And the local honey in Peru smells more like this. It's like this earthy honey rather than this like pungently sweet honey. And I really, really enjoy this. It reminds me of miel, M-I-E-L, Spanish word for honey. Smells like Peruvian honey. So enjoy this wine. What are the fruits that y'all are getting? So I've got some tropical fruits and some banana. Is there any other fruit that's going on in here? And maybe not the fruit, but maybe name the condition. Does this wine seem like it is maybe more ripe or less ripe than the Sauvignon Blanc? Maybe it's baked. Maybe it's jammy. Maybe it's raisins. I don't know what's going on. Excuse me. Use my... I would encourage you to go down that floral note if you've got it here And see if you can name a couple of the other floral notes in here. If you're like me and have terrible allergies, I still smell all the flowers, but they have some, there's obviously some that when you smell, it's way more intense than others. And I think it's that lily smell with the pollen kind of in the restaurants. They always have them in the restaurant bathrooms and the pollen's kind of everywhere, this orange pollen dust. It's almost that pungently floral. But all the fruits that I'm getting are these like baked fruit qualities. So I get like baked apple pie with some cinnamon notes, you know, and nutmeg sprinkled on top of the apples. Like brown pear, maybe even Asian pear, that kind of sweeter style, richer fruits. Definitely not getting as much of the citrus, vibrant, zippy fruits of that Sauvignon Blanc. All right, so let's taste. And now if you are tasting all of the wines, think about this wine in comparison to the last one. We're not going to go through every step. I kind of walked us through the steps of the last one. But as overall differences, did this wine seem more balanced to you? Maybe more complex to you? Maybe more acidic? Maybe more sweet? Is there any difference of this wine, just personality-wise, overall flavor-wise, as compared to the last one? Wow. Yeah, this wine gets, for me, 3 hearts and 3 stars. I love the sophistication and elegance of this wine. I love that the French oak comes through, but it's not the only thing you're getting. You're getting Viognier grape. It's just that French oak has almost provided a frame for the Viognier fruit to express itself and its flavors while still having the structure that the oak provides a little bit. So, see, Tawana says much more balanced on this one, requiring a lot more thought when analyzing the first than just jumped out at you. Yeah, that starbursty, look at me, look at me, look at me flavor profile, personality type of Sauvignon Blanc versus a little bit more of the sophistication and pulled together qualities of this Viognier. Really fascinating. So, wow. To me, and I'll talk a little bit about high elevation vineyards before we go into the Malbec. We're going to jump into the Malbec and Carmenere next. But before I do, I want to explain what elevation does to the vineyards. Why is it important? We talked about single vineyards. Why the hell do people put that on the label? Why is that important? Now we're going to talk about elevation. When winemakers say, or you see in tasting notes, well, these vineyards sit at 3,200 feet elevation. Why does that matter? Like, I understand it must be important if everyone talks about it, but what does it do to the vine, and can I taste the difference? Here's what it does to the vine. For one, you're much closer to the sun, 3,200 feet closer to the sun than we are here in Norfolk. We're right here in Norfolk. We're 6 feet under sea level in Ghent, but we're at 3,200 feet elevation. You're closer to the sun, and you have a lot more intense radiation. Excuse me. If you've ever gone skiing in the mountains or anything like that, you know that you could be outside for just a matter of 15 minutes and get sunburned, even if it's not warm outside, because there's less atmosphere protecting you from the harmful sun radiations. And so you can get burned very quickly. Well, the skin of grapes operates the same way that our skin does as humans. And so it can get blistered and damaged by extra radiation from the sun. So to protect the berries from getting sunburned or blistered or kind of zapped from the radiation of the sun, the vine understands, like the vine is this brilliant creature that understands a lot more than we think it does. So it understands when it's at high elevation, it understands that the berries are going to be blistered because of the extra radiation. So it will literally send these genes into the grapes themselves to build up thicker skin of each individual berry to help protect it. So again, what does that do? Who cares about that? Well, a lot of the color of the skin and the the color of a wine and the phenolics of a wine, meaning the flavors that are not just the fruit flavors, the bitter flavors, maybe herbaceous flavors, maybe earthier flavors. Those are coming from the actual skin of the grape, not the actual juicy fruit on the inside. And you need that to give the wine structure, balance, and depth and complexity. So you got to have that phenolic development. And for a wine to have like extra phenolics when it's at higher elevation, is just going to make those flavors that much more intense. Also, when it's closer to the sun, more radiation, the vine is struggling to produce those thicker skins, and so it's sending more energy into the grapes, so it's able to produce fewer grape clusters. So you have more concentration of flavor also, because instead of producing 10 clusters per shoot, it might only produce 7 or maybe only 5, depends on the age of the vine. And so that allows for a little bit more concentration of the fruit flavors too. So generally speaking, the higher up in elevation you go, because of radiation and the intensity of the struggle of the vine, you have more concentration of not just the fruit flavors, but also the phenolics as well. When we get to the red, we'll see a concentration of the coloring, the pigmentation of the red wines, because again, that skin contact with the grapes is what gives the red wine its color. And the thicker the skins are, the more color that the grapes are going to impart to the wine. So that's a couple of the reasons why elevation is important. Another one is just the erosion. As you're higher up in elevation, you're going to have a lot of the nutrients of the topsoil that are going to fall down the mountain, just be rain down, snow down, avalanche down, whatever it is. And so the soil is much poorer the higher up in elevation you go. And that's good, because struggle produces character. And if the vines don't have any struggle at all, then the wines have no character. So that elevation is radiation, it's extra lower yields, and it is the erosion that allows for those higher concentration of flavors in the wine. So really fascinating. I definitely get that. And also, last thing, and then we'll go on, is that diurnal temperature variations. We talked about that huge swings from day to night. So like day, we could be close to 100 degrees in the middle of the summer, and at night, we're down to like the 30s. So almost like, Virginia spring, that huge shift back and forth between really, really warm, sunny days and very cold nights. What's that doing is it's elongating the growing season. So if your grape is ripe too early in the season, that's because the vine thinks that it's done. It's got that heat spike and it never cooled down again. So it was like, oh, I guess we're done. We're at the end of the season. So we're gonna stop developing the flavors of the grape at all. That cooling down of the night, that swing back to cold nights, makes that vine think that the season's gonna be longer and longer and longer and longer, so that it allows for more complex flavors to develop. So all of those things go into the beauty of high elevation wines. So really excited. I love high elevation wines. Just not only the struggle of the vine, but the intensity of the labor that goes into making these wines is really fascinating. It's definitely, you do not do this unless you're passionate about it and this is what you want to do with your whole life. It's not like Napa Valley where it almost like you could breathe on the vines and they're going to grow amazing and amazing fruit that's going to taste great. This is a rugged terrain. It is rustic. That's where the gauchos live, the famous Argentinian cowboys. It is a harsh land that is not pleasant and conducive to easy living. But that doesn't mean that the wines aren't good. It means the wines are even better. So that's high elevation vineyards for you. Let's jump into the reds now. I want to talk about those, and I feel like I've talked way more about the whites than we'll get to with the reds, so I apologize for that. Just so excited about these white wines. So we've already introduced the wineries, though, so I don't have to talk too much about that. Finca La Escarcha, this is again their Entre Líneas, and this is their 100% Malbec, their 2016 vintage. So pour yourself a big glass of that. Notice the color. You get a little bit more of like this rusty brown coloring to it, but like ruby red, almost just like, it's like blood red wine. Really, really beautiful coloring. But the clarity is not super high on this, right? We have a little bit more of this cloudiness to the wine. And I'll talk about that, why that is when we get our noses in there. Go ahead, you know the deal now, sight, smell, taste, and overall conclusion. taste through the wine. And oh, all right. So I want to talk to you about this one aspect of winemaking that is not actually often done, but when it is, it makes wines that taste like this. And so it is called délestage, and it is a process that happens in the winery during the fermentation process. So there's so much of the wine that is made in the vineyard, right? But by just cultivating the vine a certain way, you're really allowing for certain flavors to develop in your wine, making sure that the quality of the grapes is super high. So you're already working with a really good product. Once the grapes come into the winery, they're sorted by a bunch of harvest workers who are picking out the bad grapes, and the earwigs. Earwigs love to be in vineyards, and the spiders and stuff, and taking out the leaves and the stems. And then the wine will the grape clusters will either get destemmed, meaning that the grapes will be taken off of the stem by this machine that kind of acts like a blender that kind of takes the grapes off the stems without really bursting all the grapes and cutting them open. So if the wine is destemmed, it's going to go into these big tanks now, just piles of grapes. If the wine's not, it'll go in whole cluster, meaning the grape vine itself, not long stems, but just the part with the cluster will go in there. Again, different grapes, different winemakers, different choices. So, but the process we're talking about is after the grapes get processed and we find the ones that are really good that we want to make the wine from, then they go into these fermenters. Now, fermenters can be huge tanks. They can be stainless steel. They can be plastic tubs. They can be concrete eggs. They can be all different shapes and sizes, all depending on again, what flavors the winemaker wants to express in his wine. So if it's American oak or French oak or chestnut or cement, stainless steel, plastic, doesn't matter. But the fermentation process, you're not generally getting a lot of the oak flavors of the wine yet. That happens when the wine is aged in the oak after fermentation. So most often fermentation is done in huge tanks and then separated out into different aging vessels, however the winemaker wants to age it. So the winemaker does this process called délestage, and that's where in these tanks, the juice starts mixing, right, with the actual grape skins and seeds, the pips, stems if it's still there, but all of the contact with the juice and the grape. Oh my gosh, the must. It's all called the must, but it's the grape. Wow, solids. Yeah, the grape solids, I guess, versus the grape liquids. That makes sense. So the solids rise to the top and the liquids stay on the bottom. Well, the process is you want to make sure that the solids, the grape skins, never dry out during this fermentation process, because then the wine will smell like really dusty, bitter, kind of dried out, sometimes a little raisinated, and it's not great. We don't want that in a wine. We want the wine to have fresh fruit to it, especially if it's going to be a long-lasting wine. So most wineries will do what's called a punch down, and that's almost where they would have this like big metal plate that has holes in it and a huge pole. And so workers will stand on top of the sides of the vat and punch down the cap. The cap is all the risen grape solids that rise to the top, and punch it down to kind of mix it regularly with the juice that's on the bottom to make sure nothing's dried out. That might happen 2 to 3 times a day, sometimes only once a day, but at least daily during the fermentation stage. So the carbon dioxide as the byproduct of that fermentation makes all the cap rise to the top. You want it to never get dried out. So punching it down will often create these pretty bitter, harsh tannins in a wine because you're breaking the skins over and over and over as you punch it down, and you're releasing these bitter phenolics, these tannins that come from the skins. But they can be pretty harsh depending on how aggressively you punch down. And so some winemakers, like when I was in Oregon, you do manual foot stirring to make sure that you're stirring without breaking the skins of the grape. Other people will do what's called pump overs. And so that's at the very bottom of the fermentation tank. You might have a hose with like a motor that will literally pump wine through the hose. So it'll come out the bottom of the tank and come out and be just poured kind of back on top of the fermenters, the tanks, to make sure that the wine get stirred, but you're not aggressively releasing any tannins. Délestage is a little bit differently. So on a daily basis, they'll use these pumps and they'll drain the entire juice, all of the juice from the tank, put it into a separate tank. So now the grape solids are by itself in another tank. Some of those might be removed to make sure that you're not imparting too many tannins to the wine, especially if a grape already has naturally a lot of tannins. And then after a little while, maybe like 2 hours, the wine gets pumped back into that tank. So it allows for a lot more oxygen to get imparted to the wine during that process before it's pushed back out. So a punch down, hardly any oxygen gets into the wine at all. A pump over, again, hardly any. But if you're removing all of the wine, letting it sit for 2 hours before it's put back with the grape solids, you're allowing for a lot more intentional oxygen to be imparted into the wine. So thus the color of it having a little bit more of that brownish tawny coloring, because Malbec is usually a little bit more like magenta hued fuchsia coloring. And that's because of a little bit more oxidative style of winemaking practice of this délestage. It also is going to make sure that those tannins are a little bit softer, a little bit leaner, and not as harsh. Because again, those thicker skins make sure those phenolics are even that much more concentrated. So to preserve a little bit of a softer characteristic in a wine, some winemakers, especially in high elevation regions, will employ délestage to make sure those tannins don't overpower the flavors of the grape itself. So long explanation, but I don't talk about the winemaking process enough. So it was important to explain why this Malbec tastes and looks so different than so many other Malbecs. On that note, I'd love to hear what you think about the flavors and the taste of this Malbec. Is this surprising in a good way? Because maybe Malbec's not your grape, and all of a sudden you're like, I really love this Malbec. Or maybe you were expecting the classic Malbec, and this was surprising in a way that like maybe will take some getting used to. Very curious to know your personal thoughts on this wine. Forget about the whole grid and all that stuff. I'm just jumping to the conclusion stage for this wine. Tawana says, much more balance, require a lot more thought. Nope, sorry, that was the white wine that we were talking about. Sorry. I'm always afraid of missing comments in the chat room when I get on these long, passionate lectures about something, but I need to impart all this information. And so thanks for bearing with me on that. So John says, I love Malbec. Awesome. Well, John, you need to get a bottle of this and see if you like this style of Malbec too. This will be on my feature list for a while, so it'll be available at least for a couple of months. To me, this is a Malbec can often be a more simple wine. Like you get blackberries, black pepper, a little bit of smoke, and sometimes that's it, but it's just like rich, velvety fruit, pretty intense. Lovely wines, balanced wines, but maybe more on the simple side. Often, again, not all of them, but a large percentage of the more mass-produced Malbecs can be like that. Super delicious in their own right. This wine is a little bit more of like, oh, I need to sit down and eat some food with this. I need to give this wine some thought. It needs to be decanted. I need to, this is not just pop a bottle and drink while you watch a movie kind of thing. So a little bit different style Malbec for sure. Tawana says, getting hints of barnyard, dried herbs. Yeah, leather, stewed black cherry. Not what I expected from a Malbec. I totally agree. This is quite different for sure. Oh, you were tasting. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm reading out. I wish you were tasting with us. Look for the Malbec bottle. Absolutely. You can always, the videos are up on YouTube. So if you ever want to get the wines and then retune into that one part of the video that we were talking about, the specific wine, you can absolutely do that. So, yes. So to me, I feel like I don't feel like I'm drinking a typical Malbec. I definitely feel like I am drinking a French wine when I'm drinking this wine. So actually, I need to taste it. Yeah, totally totally different than a classic Malbec. So, all right, on that note, we are going to go to Carmenere. And I think, yeah, no, I don't want to tell you until the very end. This is Omne. This is their single vineyard Carmenere again. Omne only really does this specific label of the winery of Vigna Tabali, only does single vineyard bottlings of all their wines. So this is their Carmenere, and totally different color, as you can see. And Tawana, are you getting licorice on the finish of the Malbec, or are you on to the Carmenere now? Which one are you referring to? Wow, if you, I'm just taking the glass and I'm just kind of spinning it right here, and I'm just seeing how much this Carmenere, the wine, is staining the inside of the glass because it is so extracted. So we are not at 3,200 feet elevation. We're going back to Chile, remember? So we're lower elevation, but we're higher than the Sauvignon Blanc vineyard was. So this vineyard sits at about 1,000 feet elevation. So still higher elevation, just not as dramatically high as Tupungato was. So, all right, we're talking about that. Let me see, licorice. I don't know, I think I need more time with that wine to, I don't get licorice off the bat. I definitely get that like stewed sherry thing that you were saying. But I definitely do not do licorice a whole lot. So I miss those tasting notes because it's not something that I ever really eat on a regular basis. So I need to try. I'll let you know as I go back to revisit that wine. All right, so Carmenere, what is this grape and why is it so important to Chile? So Carmenere is actually native to Bordeaux. All of these grapes are actually native to France. Sauvignon Blanc is native to France, actually, in the Loire Valley mostly, and further south in Bordeaux. Viognier is native to Rhone Valley, where it developed in very long time ago. We're talking like in the 1400s, I think Viognier was kind of known to be its own grape. Malbec is known in France as Cot, C-O-T. And the O has like a little hat on it. And it is called Cot there. Malbec in France is either made by itself, usually in like the southwest of France, or it's blended with Cabernet, Cabernet Franc, Merlot in the area of Bordeaux. The 5 grapes of Bordeaux include Malbec, but mostly the famous ones are Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, like the 2 most important, Cabernet Franc, really important, and then sprinkled in there are Malbec and Petit Verdot. Back before the 1800s, there was a 6th grape that was prolifically grown, and it was Carmenere. But when phylloxera came and wiped out 99.9% of all the vineyards throughout France, wiped out Carmenere, and they just never really replanted it because Carmenere didn't really do so well in Bordeaux. And here's why. Carmenere is a late ripening grape, so it takes longer to ripen fully than Merlot. Let's say Merlot is actually harvested 4 to 5 weeks earlier than Carmenere normally ripens. So quite a bit later ripening than Merlot. So in Bordeaux is a much cooler climate, not as cool as it was in the 1800s, thanks global warming, but it is cooler than it is here in Chile where we are. And so they just never ripened fully. And so the grapes just never developed enough of that character, enough of that brightness, enough of that natural fruit to really add much to the wine. Struggled with more late frost, hailstorms, extra rain, all of this stuff that you have to deal with when a grape is much later to be harvested in a cooler climate. This is why Carmenere kind of didn't really keep going in its birthplace of Bordeaux, France. It was brought over to Argentina and Chile in about the mid-1900s, and it was brought up through California as well, and even brought down into Italy in the early 1900s, where they all kind of developed different names. This is back before DNA testing on grapes and stuff. So when it went to Italy, they thought it was Cabernet Franc, and because they look so similar, Cabernet Franc is actually the parent, the genetic parent of Carmenere. Got together with Gros Cabernet, G-R-O-S, not that the Cabernet was gross. The grape isn't really around anymore, but Gros Cabernet, if you're going to be really French about it. And they had a baby, and the baby was Carmenere. So when they bring Carmenere over to Italy, they all thought it was Cabernet Franc, actually. So that's what it was called there until the late 90s, when they were like, oh, this is actually Carmenere. We just didn't know it. When it was brought to Chile, most people thought it was Merlot. And if they knew it was slightly different than the Merlot that was also being grown there because of its later ripening qualities, they're like, all right, we'll just call this Merlot Chileno, so Chilean Merlot. They knew it was different than Merlot, but they didn't know exactly what it was. It was brought to California where they thought it was Cabernet Sauvignon. So grown throughout the rest of the world, but not really in its place of origin of France, but everywhere else in the rest of the world up until the 90s thought it was a different grape. And so it wasn't until the mid 90s, late 90s that they're starting to do genetic testing on grape varieties to be like, oh, we got Carmenere. Oh, we do too. Oh, we do too. We all were calling it something different. But now we see this explosion of like up until 94, no Carmenere was grown in Chile. And now we have 17,000 acres planted to just Carmenere in Chile versus the dramatic 50 acres. That's 50 acres throughout all of France. And that's by like 2008 or something like that. So I don't have the most current information, but wildly different from its birthplace, where it's only now has 50 acres to buy, to Chile, where it now has 17,000. It's considered like almost like the grape of Chile. So just like Malbec, native to France, brought over to Argentina, where it thrived more than it ever did in France, and it became like the grape, the red grape of Argentina. Carmenere kind of had the same awakening in Chile. But Chile had a little bit more, and Argentina, they both had political and economic instability. There was Chile's Pinochet, which created massive instability in the global markets as people were boycotting anything coming from Chile. So we're really seeing, again, a later blossoming wine revolution in Chile than we did in Argentina. But Argentina also had its issues too. So either way, we're both seeing about the last 35 years is about it that we have of history of like premium wine grown and distributed on a global scale of quality wine. What I think is the problem with both Chile and Argentina is that they cornered themselves into a market almost like Australia did, in that they became known for, just like Australia became known for Shiraz, they became known for like the cheap wine. So Australia became known for like it's Penfolds Ben $4.99. You know, it's literally $4.99 kind of bottom shelf screw cap wines. And so Chile and Argentina kind of became known for like great reds and whites, but always under 10. And so when they're producing some of these higher end wines, they might be able to sell their top tier because they became kind of cult wines, but all of the premium wines in the middle that are like higher quality than your $10 stuff, but not as expensive as your 50 and up stuff, all of this stuff became harder to market because they just didn't, they again, focused too much on one or the other. And so it's always my passion, you know, to find the wines that over deliver in this price range. And I really thought that this wine, this Carmenere, brought it to the table. So much pizzazz, so much flavor. So tell me what you're smelling in this wine. Whew. This wine spends about 18 months in French oak. Their Sauvignon Blanc had no oak at all on this. All of the wines we featured tonight were all French oak, no American oak at all. There is plenty of American oak throughout Chile and Argentina, but these particular wineries focus definitely more on that French oak. I love when Carmenere is done well. Sometimes Carmenere, if you pick it too early, remember it's that late harvesting grape. If you pick it too early, you have all of the phenolics have ripened, being those bitter notes. That's why it can taste so green sometimes, and you're just chewing on bark, and it's like green wood. But if you let it ripen all the way, you get this like beautiful, beautiful fruit component. of both red and black fruits. So I'm getting like these red currants in the wine. I'm also getting this black cherry, blackberry, deep brambly fruit. It's gorgeously feminine and rustic at the same time. The tannins are so much more like velvety, soft, and smooth because they've let it ripen all the way. But Carmenere, like Cabernet Franc, its genetic parent, still has to me that little bit of like green bell pepper characteristic to it. So not quite like the jalapeno that we had in Sauvignon Blanc, but it is that green bell pepper kind of weeds, like fresh, like summertime, you're cutting the lawn, kind of this like juicy green quality to the wine, and not in a bitter way. So awesome. Alan said blackberry also. Fabulous. I love it. And by the way, if you're always saying tasting notes that I'm not saying, that doesn't mean that you were wrong in smelling or tasting any of those things. Everybody's got different palates, right? But it is fun to have tasting notes that they're like, oh yeah, I just read it. That other person said the same thing too. It's fun to be validated that way. But trust your palate. If you smell and taste blackberries, then you smell and taste blackberries. I'm really excited about this wine, and I'm excited to feature it with a lot of like stuff off the grill. So whether it's burgers and hot dogs or Italian sausages or grilled mushroom caps or anything with a little bit of that like char grill on it, when it's a charcoal grill, me really excited to pair this wine with it. Yes, it's got some oak on it, but the oak isn't overpowering. So it's a red wine that, while full-bodied and oaky, I will enjoy into the warmer weather. It's not just a winter wine for me. So I'm so pleasantly surprised to find this wine and really enjoy it. Yep, not going to spit that wine at all. Well, I hope y'all got some new South American finds out of this class as well. Was there any one wine that surprised you the most? Maybe the Malbec because it was so different than what you had thought, or maybe the Viognier because you had never had a Viognier like that before, or anything. Maybe it was Carmenere because you've never had Carmenere that full-bodied and dense. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the wines, and so would everybody else. So I'm asking, this is where I'm going to ask for a little bit of help me advertise these classes. So if you want to take a picture of your tasting notes at all and post them up onto Facebook or Instagram, tag me in it. Make sure I'm tagged. Here's my tag if you don't already know it. At Vino Culture VA. You got to get that VA in there for Virginia. Vino Culture is apparently already an Instagram handle for a wine bar in Hungary. So I put VA on that. So take a picture of this, tag in there, tell other people that you loved wine class, that you learned something and tasted some new wines. We are still going to continue doing these virtual classes even as everything opens up. It allows me to be able to reach people who can't get a sitter all the time, or can't get home from work into a restaurant in time for these in-person classes, or just love being able to taste from the comfort of their own home. So I might not do them every Saturday as we open up into the summer, but I would love to keep doing them as long as there are people like you who want to taste wine with other people, even if it's just through a computer screen. So please let me know what you thought about the wines and what other classes you would like to see in the future. Tonight, I will be posting my schedule of classes throughout the rest of April and May, and we'll kind of take it from there. Elaine says, I never tried Carmenere. I love this one. Awesome. I'm so glad. I agree that it'll pair well with grilled meats. Fabulous. It makes me happy to hear that. Ada says, Malbec was definitely a different Malbec for sure. As you've expanded our taste, I've strayed from Malbec, but love this one. Carmenere was delicious. Awesome. It's funny how our taste changed so much. And if I got my wine all from one person, and they were curating wine for me, I would see my palate continue on into and develop more to the wines that they like, just because that's where I'm getting my wines from. So That's why I've tried to expand the different vendors that I get my wine from, just so I can continue to try and find new wines. So I'm not always bringing similar wines to everybody, because I can, just like everybody, I can get in ruts and taste through and enjoy the same wines or the same kind of wines over and over. So I'm trying to get out of my bubble a little bit. So thank you for letting me do that with you. Lane also says the Viognier was surprising. Really enjoyed it. Great. The Carmenere and Viognier were my favorites tonight. Awesome. I'm glad you liked one from the Argentinian side and one from the Chilean side as your favorites. So, well, this was, and Tawana says the Viognier and the Malbec were my two surprises. Okay, great. So you stuck like right in the Argentinian side. Those were your surprises. I think definitely the Sauvignon Blanc was a little bit more like classic Chilean Sauvignon Blanc. So it's probably the least surprising, but it was so enjoyable that it's not that it was bad, it just wasn't as surprising as some of the other ones. And so very cool. See, Tawana says, sorry, going back, seeing what I missed. The wine is fascinating. The Carmenere, getting more of that cooked bell pepper, eucalyptus, or basil. Can't decide. Love it. Lots of black fruit on the palate, almost jammy. Yes, I would totally agree with those tasting nights. I had such a blast tasting through these South American wines. Thank you for nerding out with me about single vineyards, about high elevation, about délatage, and the history of grapes as they spread throughout the Americas. It was a pleasure. I look forward to seeing y'all again soon. If you were tuned in and weren't grabbing the wines, make sure you let me know in advance. I always have a few extra wine packages of the wine, or at least I try to. So even if it's super last minute on Saturday, let me know, and I'm sure that I might be able to bring you wine packages in the future. So that's for you, John, so you can get the wines next time. Glad you enjoyed the information. You probably remembered more than we did, because we were drinking wine while we were doing this. So if you weren't drinking the wines, maybe you retained a little bit more of the information. So that's awesome. So great to see you all. Hope to see you next week. And until then, drink some fabulous South American wines. Cheers, y'all.